Good afternoon. I have this lovely block, and so I'm actually glad that I got it because you guys know the rules about the after lunch block, right? So hopefully everybody's got their Coke Zero, right? Your Diet Coke, your Sprite, something with sugar in it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking today because one of the best things I ever learned about standing in the room with other leaders is the best resources that you ever have are the folks who do the same work that you do, right? Especially those who do it in other places, in other buildings, with other populations, right? Us being able to trade ideas, right, and to see one another as comrades in arms is always the best way to go. On the screen behind you, we've got our title slide. But what I'm going to ask you to do, if you have technology with you, is to hit that QR code. We have a Padlet for the entire institute over the last 2 days. In it, there is about, I don't know, maybe 12 rows over to your right. There is a pink Padlet document that you will need to engage today. Because I'm not going to be doing a lot of talking, one of our foci this afternoon, right, is to get you into some of the most recent research. Somebody once told me that the best leaders are constant learners, right? But I don't know about you, but nobody builds time into our schedules for that, right? They want you to read those 400-page books they keep putting out, right? And you're like, when? Like you're like, last night at 8 o'clock, I got a text message that one of my kids was missing. When do I have time to read? And so we're going to get to spend some time together diving into some of the most recent research that's out there about equity. I joked with somebody earlier today, one of the joys of equity work is it's kind of like flying a plane while you build it because there's so much new research out there. So we want to get you all into your technology, onto your Padlet, because we're going to do some writing, we're going to do some talking, and we're going to do a bunch of sharing, right? Because I believe that all the answers that we need to respond to what we are dealing with in all of our schools, all of that wisdom sits in the room. So let's mine it together, shall we? So welcome. I'm glad to be able to spend this time with you. We're going to start our time together today with a fire right. So 3 minutes. For those of you who like to write on paper, feel free. I promise you I will not be checking your homework today. But we're going to take the first 3 minutes to answer this question. And our question today is, reflecting on what you know about equity, how has equity or equity-related work positively affected your life? We're going to take 3 minutes and we're going to write. I don't know, for those of you who are like me, I just like to ponder in my mind. We're going to take 3 minutes to do that, and then I'm going to ask for 3 volunteers to share. Yes, we're going to be sharing. I know this is a really big room, but it's fine, right, because we're all teachers. So, right, we're all teachers first. So, 3 minutes to think about how equity has impacted our lives personally. Somebody is getting up the courage to stand up and share their story about how that's true. We'll be back together in 3 minutes. Okay, so I need 3 volunteers who are feeling bold or sleepy and you're just trying to shake yourself out of it. Either way, I'm open. We've got microphones on both sides of the room. We want to hear 3 stories about how equity has impacted the lives of those of us who are sitting in this room today. I believe in wait time. One, you can pick the microphone closest to you. I need 2 and 3. For the record, I used to teach special education, so my wait time is long. Where? Yes! Whichever microphone is closest to you. We need 1 more. I know you're out there. Thank you. You can step to the microphone closest to you. Let's hear from you.
Hopefully I got this right. Can you everybody hear me? Basically, what I wrote was reflecting on what I know about equity now and understand is that it taught me to observe more and to critically think about the way I teach a concept or idea. And how do I make it meaningful to all the teachers I support so that they take it back to the classroom?
Thank you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Is this on? Oh, there
Yes,
we go.
ma'am.
Hi, I'm Elena Periano. I work at Equitas Academy in downtown LA. I think that the way that equity and equity-related work has positively impacted me is mostly through my own self-interrogation. Equity work is not something that you do for a little bit of time. It is life's work. I think where it's impacted me the most is thinking through my experience, my race, my positionality with my team, and all of the things that make me me, and how I show up in spaces with my team and my kids, especially when my students don't look like me. Um, I also think it impacts, like I said, the teachers and the community that I serve, and also has created really wonderful experiences where I can open up and reach out and learn more about others.
Thank you so much. We like applause.
Testing. Okay, wonderful. My name is Rosa Isaiah, and I am Director of Elementary Equity and Access in Norwalk La Mirada. So this is my passion. This question just woke me up, and I'm not even finished with my coffee yet. So I wrote down a few notes, but as an ed leader, equity is the vision, the lens that I use for all decisions that I make. Equity has affected my entire life. As a woman, as a Latina, as an ed leader, as a writer, it is a passion of mine. I don't believe we can truly educate all children without equity and having that equity lens. Because our children are diverse, and diversity in identity and lived experiences and successes and challenges, and more importantly, in how they are perceived in this world. So it's really important that we use the lens for the work that we do for and with kids.
Thank you. Okay, you guys got to forgive me. I'm gonna put my old principal hat on because we're spread out, and this is a really big room. I'm feeling a little nervous, but that's me being transparent. But also, I want to bring something back. Back when I was still in schools every day, we used to do something for folks called a power clap. So you used to stomp twice, 1, 2, and then you clap twice. You guys with me? Can we try that? On the count of 3, we're gonna stomp, stomp, and clap, clap. 1, 2, 3. Now, can we give 3 power claps for our 3 volunteers who stood up in front of this room unrequired to share with us? On the count of 3, 1, 2, 3. Thank you. All right, let's jump in. Okay, so today, part of our conversation is going to include one of the fundamental elements I believe that is necessary to do equity work from a leadership position, right? Equity in a classroom, that work, right, is very individual. But as leaders of schools, organizations, programs, and systems, right, we're not just talking about the way we lead, but it's how we lead through other people. And so I want to start off by exemplifying something that our friend from Equitas shared, right? I'm going to start off by introducing myself with positionality. And it's important in equity work because for us to hear each other well, to hear each other, to touch each other, to communicate, right, and connect across difference, we need to understand where we're coming from, right? And 2 people who look the same can come from 2 completely different places. 2 people with similar experience can still come from completely different places, right? And how we understand the other person speaks to how we hear what it is they have to say, especially when they challenge us, right? And one of the challenges, right, of leading with equity is being in a position where you invite people to challenge your thinking all the time. Okay, I am Dr. Taisha Noyes. My compatriot here gave me a lovely resume-sounding sort of introduction. But let me introduce you to me through my lenses. I am a Christian. I know you're like, what does that have to do with the point? But in the political climate we live in, we know that for a lot of people, their religious leaning, right, dictates their everyday decisions. I'm a Black woman. It's not hard for you to see, but I am an African American, which is unique from being Afro-Caribbean or being directly from the continent, right? I am a native of South Central Los Angeles, and I'm old enough, I'm dating myself, to remember when they called it South Central Los Angeles. I know now we're South LA and we're Westchester adjacent, but I was here when it was South Central. I am a first gen, right? Other than high school, in my family, I'm the first gen of all the things. Bachelor's, master's, doctorate, all of it, I was first, even though the sibling above me is 7 years older than me. I have been a teacher. That was how I started. I actually started in mental health. I thought I was going to be a therapist before I went into teaching. But I have taught gen ed, special ed, middle school, high school, and college. And so those lenses inform. And I'm excited to stand before you today because I feel like this is an enormous chasm we never get to fill, right? Those of us who are in middle schools and high schools never get to talk to folks about early learning and how you taught certain things to kids, because when those gaps show up at upper levels, we are often poorly prepared to help kids fill in those gaps because development has not been our focus, right? I am also the grandchild of 2 women who ran in-home daycare before they paid for in-home daycare, right? And so I feel like I've been with children, in love with children, and all things development related my entire life. I am also the daughter of a woman who had her first child at the age of 15 and was left on her own to raise her. Conversely, I'm also a graduate of Azusa Pacific with a doctorate, right? And so having defied all the odds that people told me literally in classes when I was an undergrad were impossible, right? I feel like equity has been my life and my life's work. And so when you hear me today, I want you to be able to hear me with these lenses in mind, right? As we build out our reciprocal learning partnership in this space, because LACO is hoping that you come back and come back and come back again, that we can sit in this space and do this work together, right? You'll find that one of the most important pieces of reciprocal learning partnerships, a place where none of us are experts, but all of us are constantly learning, right? Understanding our identity and positionality and being able to stand in it with comfort, just knowing what it is, knowing where we're still learning, knowing where we have expertise, right, matters, not only in how people hear us, but in the decisions that we make, right? All right, very quickly, today, we're just gonna kind of work through something I'm liking to call the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, why, and how. I don't know why there's 5 W's with an H, but that's neither here nor there. Isn't that one of those like old things you wondered about but never talk about? But the 5 W's of equity and early learning for those of us who lead systems in schools. We're gonna be focused on a couple of the position statements that came from the NAEYC. One of them is providing high quality learning services. What does it mean to think about our systems in terms of trying to provide high quality for every single child we serve, right? And 2, thinking about how the protocols that we establish for dealing with maladaptive or misbehavior, right, are equitable when we build them so that we don't end up with disparities with our most vulnerable populations. You can see we're already into our agenda. Our language objective today is that you guys are gonna review the 5 W's and you're gonna talk about it. You're gonna share practice and areas for growth, right, among yourselves. And our homework always, we're gonna be equity champions when this is over. Okay, hopefully you are in your note catcher. Inside your note catcher, on the top of page 2, there is a text for you to read. I'm gonna ask you to read the text in section 2 at the top of page 2 on your note catcher and to annotate this way using marginalia. We wanna use exclamation points for key takeaways. We want to use question marks for information that makes you go, You want to underline those things that are already aligned to your practice. You're like, this is something we are strong at. And then you want to highlight ideas that might require a shift in the way we think about or the way we facilitate a certain kind of practice on our campus. Of course, with an eye toward things related to discipline and intervention. All right, we're gonna take 2 minutes. We're gonna read the text on the top of page 2, and then we're coming back together to talk to each other about what that means for us. as you look at the text, what are the ideas that jump out at you about what equity is? What are those fundamental tenets? What do you see there that are words that we usually don't necessarily see when we read a text about equity? Any thoughts? Disrupting inequitable practices. What else we got? Explicitly address power differences and oppression. I heard this love lady. Was it you in the blue somewhere? Active and intentional focus on. One more. For children, families, communities, and the workforce that serves them. Which leads itself to answer our second question. Who is equity for? Again, who is equity for? Who is equity for? I know it is the afternoon, but I had to work all weekend, so we're going to make this work. Who is equity for? Everyone. Right? Everyone has a part to play in getting it done, and everybody has gifts and benefits that they receive by the work that we do together. We're going on to our next slide. Now, why? One of our lovely compatriots and comrade in arms, who might be a little older than me, more mature, have more years of experience than me, she said, equity didn't necessarily affect me, but it affected those who came up behind me, because there are girls who get to go to school and learn more than cooking and sewing. And it was interesting. I hadn't even contextualized myself as one of those people, but she added a lens for me, right, about my age being one of the lenses I need to look through, right? Because my grandmother didn't have the opportunities I have. My mother didn't have the opportunities that I have. And so we're going to get into why equity work is necessary. So on pages 3 through 6, we're going to annotate some additional text. This is from a new publication by the CDE that I know you guys didn't have time to read before you got here. That's why we're taking the time to do it together. And it talks about why this work is so necessary, not just for our little babies, not just for our bigger kids, but throughout the lifespan, how us pouring in and making equitable decisions now create life outcomes, not just for children and families, but for their entire communities. So we're going to take 10 minutes. We're going to read the text on pages 3 through 6, and we're going to annotate, as we discussed, key takeaways, questions we have, things that are already embedded in our practice, and then activities or ideas that might require a shift in practice. Our framing questions as we read is this: why is equity work necessary? And I think this is an important question to answer, because as you go back to your campuses, as you train in your district, in your region, a colleague and I were chatting just before lunch, and she said, you know, I have lots of people who look at me and go, why do I have to do this? It worked just fine for me. And so for a lot of us that are sitting in the room, right, a lot of us work in school because school worked for us, right? Like we enjoyed it. It worked just fine for a lot of us, right? But it's not working so fine for a lot of the kids that we serve today. And so part of the goal of this time together is to equip you with information and research. So that when people go, well, it was fine for me, you can go, but you know, the research says, not so fine for all the kids we say we love, right? So we're gonna take 10 minutes. We're gonna check out pages 3 through 6 in our note catcher. And then we're gonna come back together, process that information, and talk about all of the good things about why equity work is necessary. Let's get back into the reason that we are here today when we think about why equity work is necessary. After reading those 3 pages of research, right? Not somebody's opinion, not a single perspective. We're talking about the perspective of researchers and educators, particularly throughout our state, if not across the nation. Why do we believe equity work is necessary? we're talking to each other today. So get loose, get comfortable, and let's talk about it. Always volunteers. Otherwise, I'm going to start standing next to tables where nobody has spoken.
Can everybody hear me? Yes. Fantastic. All right. We were talking about how this is important because I don't know if you were to ask the room of people here, how many of you find this surprising? Nobody's going to raise their hand. But if you ask, how many of you discriminate? Thank you, Jackie. How many of you discriminate, or how many of you have a higher instance of sending Black boys out of the classroom or Black or kids of color out of the classroom? I think then we all say, oh, no, not me. No, that I know it's happening, but it's happening there. It's not happening, not in my classroom, not at my school, not at my fill in the blank. So I think equity work, we have to work with the adults because they're not at a place yet where they can say, I think I've done that.
Thank you so much. Okay, we got more hands. I like it.
Oh, well said. At the end of the day, we can't get away from the idea that this work is about the adults and starting with that initial mirror check. Like, how do I feel about my students, all students, certain students? What are my biases about the work that I do with certain students? And just really coming to terms with how you feel. What is your positionality? And how is that impacting inequity and injustice for kids? But I love what you said about the adult piece. It's a lot harder to look in the mirror and talk about what I'm doing to impact injustice or inequity.
Thank you so much for these rich shares. We're going to keep sharing. I like what you guys brought up because I think it connects beautifully back to the conversation that we started when I introduced myself, talking about reciprocal learning partnerships, why we need to be aware of our lenses, right? This is that part about identity and positionality, understanding that when I am the teacher in the classroom, right? Most of us, when we were in the classroom, felt like our classroom was our world. It was our domain. Okay, I'm going to say something to you that you cannot repeat. And if you do, I'm going to deny it. But I used to joke with my kids. I used to teach in New York City and be like, this is not a democracy. It's a dictatorship. You can call me Fidel Castro, but in here, it's going to happen the way I asked you for it to happen. Right? Okay, I was the first year. Sue me. Right? But I used to say it because that was how I felt about it. Right? But understanding now, right, from an equity standpoint, that that it needed to happen a lot of ways for a lot of kids in my classroom because it wasn't just my classroom. It was our classroom. It was the space where I had the responsibility to make them feel safe. But nobody had given me books. I don't know about y'all. Maybe it's better for early childhood. But nobody had given me books that said that room was as much theirs as it was mine.
I don't know who said it, but she said the self-interrogation. So it's easy to look at Caucasian people and say, I expect for you to act this way. But it's harder to look at yourself, a person of color who the system has worked for, and realize that you're just as hegemony is what we deal with. So you're hegemonic, you're oppressive, you're just as mean because it worked for you. So if I grew up in the down the street from projects in Watts, I'm first everything and privileged, right? But I'm also a teen mom. But it worked for me because now I have a moniker of doctor. So if you just do these things, it'll work for you. So it's self-interrogation. I love whoever said that you're wonderfully magnificent because it's easy for me to point at whomever and say, oh, you're white, you're wrong, you're oppressive. What about myself? Because I navigate that world and I have to show my children how to navigate this world and not look down on them because you didn't pull yourself up by the proverbial bootstrap. You don't have no boots. You don't have no shoes and they don't fit or they hurt and you're hungry. And I need to not oppress you to appear to make you better. Who was it said, my humanity is caught up in your humanity. And I can't judge you just because I figured out how to make it work.
And I think we can also interrogate the idea of what it means to have made it or to have made it work and what that costs some of us. I see you. You can go next.
In one of our sessions, just before the lunch, we were talking about implicit bias. And it goes back again to the adults. And I think we should be able to hold ourselves accountable, especially in the work that we do. So if a colleague of mine is having that implicit bias, but she's not even aware of it, it starts with us helping each other and holding each other accountable to make sure that she doesn't do it again. But if we just keep pushing it around and just saying, oh, that they're just being biased or just being biased, and they might not even know, it's not fair to them either. So I think it starts with us holding ourselves accountable and holding our colleagues and staff accountable.
Absolutely. I think for those of us who lead groups of leaders, right, whether that's inside of our schools, within a region or district. Wait, I had one more. Thank you, much closer. When we think about that, right, that as leaders who supervise folks who we are challenging to have these very challenging, often uncomfortable, sometimes painful conversations, that we have to also be prepared to call in the reinforcements when that conversation doesn't go well, but we need those two people to continue to work together. How do we, right, when you hear me across this difference and I hurt your feelings, can I use you as an example, right? I've called her out. It might have been private. She didn't receive it in the way that I had hoped. She responds to me with something that feels painful, right? So now there's this tension between us, but we need to work together for kids, right? Then we talk to the supervisor because we don't want to work together anymore. And no, I'm not making this up. I've been here and gone through this with people, right? I had supervisors for a long time who kind of shrugged their shoulders like, we'll figure it out. But it's not that easy. And so as we think about holding ourselves accountable, right? As we think about mustering the courage, because it takes a great deal of courage to sit down and look at people that we respect, some of whom are very good friends of ours. They might have been at our children's birthday party last weekend, right? And say, hey, this decision, this statement, this comment may not have had the equity lens I had hoped, right? We also have to be prepared to call in our mental health folks, our folks who do mediations and restorations of relationships, right? Because we also have to work through, right, while we work this thing out.
I'm not sure exactly where to start, but in the session I was in prior to lunch, we were talking about all the different silos happening in education and in education leadership, and even like at the state level and all of the policy. And I had brought up that I don't see students with disabilities being talked about in a lot of this legislation. And I expected to see it more. And so I appreciate this research that you brought, bringing that into perspective and including students with disabilities in our equity conversations. And it's more than just conversations. It's more than talking to our colleagues and helping them notice. I mean, it's a system level problem. We're not serving our students with disabilities with equity by separating them and segregating them, and therefore we're not serving this population and our boys of color who are being over-identified and segregated because of that with equity. So I think we need to talk about the special education system.
I agree with her, if I may, to a degree, right? As a special educator, there is a myriad of research about exclusion with kids with special needs. There is legislation as thick as I am tall, right, for special education and protections for students, right, who qualify for anything related to IDEA. And the reason that I'm parsing this statement is because when I sit in rooms, particularly with leaders, with other leaders of color, right, we don't want to have the boys of color conversation and the SPED conversation all the time, because what about our boys of color who are excelling well and still being treated poorly? I worked at a high school where I had football stars who got put out of classrooms with 3.7 GPAs. They didn't have IEPs, but they were boys of color. And those same challenges about the lens that we look at when we see them and we acknowledge or we engage their behavior still came up. And so I think that it is important, without a doubt, to have a special education conversation, but I do think it's important to keep the equity conversation as broad as we can so that that umbrella doesn't leave out the children who it's left out before. And I think for a long time, the boys of color were left out because we assumed that they were taken care of in the special education conversation. And those who achieve well are not addressed in that conversation.
So this made me think about a teacher that I have, and I think that equity work is necessary because I think that she often thinks that she is advocating for the boys of color by always turning to the SPED IEP. But I think if more equity work was done, she would understand that it takes a different approach and different ways to teach these boys of color. And it's not so much, oh, they're having difficulty learning, or he needs to be held back, or I'm going to do that. It's no, look at you and look at them and look at how you're teaching them, and your way is not working for them. It's really most of the time not the student, it's the teacher. But I think if more equity work were done, then she would realize that. I don't think that she's necessarily trying to marginalize the boys. And, I think she just is not seeing that it's not them, that, and she thinks she's fighting for them and advocating. And I always feel like bad because I send her back, but it's not because I don't believe her. It's because I just know a little more and I try to help her with that. But I just think more needs to be done overall so she can really see, like, it's not always something wrong. It's not always an IEP conversation or, that's not what that is. So I think equity work will help that change her way of thinking.
I love that statement. And I'm going to harken back again and again, right, to the reciprocal learning partnership framework. One of the reasons it's so important, like my initial thought, right, about your teacher is the question of what other tools does she have, right? If she assumes, right, that behavior or an academic challenge in the class must be because a student cannot do the thing that she's asked, right? Which I don't think is a terrible place to start, right? Her initial thought is, okay, well, I go to special education, but is that because she doesn't know there are other questions to ask or other people to reach out to, right? I come from a very sort of charter world here on the West Coast, right, where I used to run teams for intervention. So I had grade level team leads who came to meetings bi-weekly. We sat and went through student data, and then teachers presented to other teachers on the data and sat them in grade level teams together. Why was this important for reciprocal learning partnership? One, everybody gets to deal with their own positionality. But two, it created resources, because when I, as a teacher, sit down next to a teacher who says, Joe is fantastic in my class. He has an A in my English class. How is he failing your history class? Then all of a sudden, I'm forced to ask the question. And nobody had to sort of force me, right, into asking the question. It sort of evolves naturally. If Joe has 4 A's, a B, and he's got a D in my class, maybe it's not Joe, right? But, right, it comes to bear with us, right? How do we use the out-of-class time that we have with teachers in order to promote equity? What kind of settings, setup, situations, professional learning opportunities, collaborative opportunities are we creating for teachers to be in the room together? One, to share that kind of data, because sometimes teachers don't know, but also to push one another's thinking. As a person who used to teach special education, I was somebody who people came to frequently because they were like, you get kids to do stuff that nobody else can get them to do. But like you, right? I walked in classrooms and was like I wrote you an IEP, pulled it out, wrote we used to have keychains with IEP stuff on. We had docs. We had every kind of doc possible. It's like, you have not done any of the things that is on this for this child. No wonder. But also, as a person with a mental health background who used to run intervention teams, I sat down with teacher teams. We made plans for kids. I go in 3 classrooms. Everybody's implementing plan. Kids great. I go in 3 other classrooms, and everybody's forgotten what we talked about in the grade level meeting needs to happen for this child, even though they don't have an IEP. But still, he's getting sent out of class to the office, right? Sometimes she, because I got some she's in my life who also get sent out of class, right? But this, I think you guys did a masterful job, right, of talking about why it's necessary. The truth of the matter is, as much as the American education system purports the idea, right, that average is a real thing. Average is a numerical concept. It is not a developmental concept, right? We think kids should be right about, but we can't even account in many cases for the factors that kids face that present what we see in a classroom. And until we sit down, right, 6 perspectives, 7 perspectives, 8 perspectives of people who work with this child every day, do we get a clear picture of the whole child who needs something that we may or may not have set up already. And then face the challenge of, holy crap, if it's not special education, it's not a 504, and it's not a behavior disorder, rats, what do we do now? Who else do we have? Who do we call, right? But that is why equity is important, right? It's supposed to inform where we spend money, what positions we select, who we put in place, right? To ensure that educators have everything they need to meet the needs of children. So let us continue. We've got one more text that I want to challenge you with before we go. But as we think about why equity is what it is, who is it for, why it's necessary, right? And where. Like, this is kind of a when and where. So I'm going to kind of skip through this one because I want to spend a real good chunk on a piece from Dr. Orange that's at the end of our reader. But equity is deep work and it is wide work. Some days it feels unending. It feels like standing on a seashore and just looking out at the Pacific, right? And so I don't want us to be overwhelmed by that idea, because anybody who's ever ridden a cruise ship knows you can cross the Pacific. You might not be able to see the end from where you stand right now, but you can definitely get to the other side, right? But also we're being reminded, right, that equity is not just, right, the individual teacher and the individual student. It is the system that allows a teacher who, even when given professional learning, even when given clear expectations for culturally responsive teaching, even when given support, help, coaching, and all of those things, still gets to be at our school. Why? I know that's a heavy one, right? Especially in the teacher shortage, I know. Right, but our commitment to the kids, all of them, right, to the community, all of them, to families, all of them, have to be bigger, right, than our commitment to one person being comfortable in our school because they like us or we like them. Right? Because if we're talking about one teacher in the 4th grade, we're talking about one teacher in the 1st grade, 25 kids in a classroom. That's 25 futures. It's 25 lives. It's 25 families whose lives are impacted by whether or not their kids get what they need. And so we, as leaders, right, shoulder the weight of the fact that this work is structural, it's institutional. Somebody talked about the disconnect between what happens at the policy level and what happens on the ground. Oh, the joys of education, right? It's interpersonal, right? Whether that dynamic is child to child, teacher to child, administrator to teacher, administrator to teacher to child, teacher to parents. I don't know about you guys, but that one gets real prickly in my world sometimes. But also, one of the great challenges of equity, right, is that it's hard work, but it is also hard work. There is so much of this work that feels like a two-way mirror. Anybody else have that experience? You sit down, you look at a text, you sit down, you analyze the situation, you're like, I thought that was right when I did it, but now I don't know. I know something now I don't know. I've been invited to a lens with a colleague that I did not have before, and now I'm not quite sure, right? But it's worthy work, right? Because we know that success in every classroom, in every school, throughout this region means that we get to change the world. Don't let that be lost upon us, right? I still believe, after all these years, I still believe that every time we change a kid's life, we change the world. We change the trajectory of their families, right? We can go from generational poverty to generational wealth in one jump if kids are successful in school. One jump. we can undo 150, 200, 250 years of injustice by getting it right for this kid in this classroom, in this room today. That's the part where we all applaud because we're excited. Okay, we're gonna leap forward a little bit because we don't have a lot of time. So I'm gonna ask you to leap forward to page 9 of your reader. There is an excerpt by Dr. Tanika Orange of UCLA. She runs Center X, which has a focus on race and equity in schools. She is a former teacher, administrator, and school founder who now leads work for school and system leaders. And she built something called the Reciprocal Partnership Framework, Learning Framework. And it's about what are the structures that we have to build emotionally, socially, and within our systems in order to bear the weight of equity work, right? There's nothing light about this conversation. There's nothing light about challenging ourselves every single day to understand the shoes of somebody we have never walked in. But it's worthy work. So we're gonna take 6 minutes. We are gonna read pages 9 through 11, and then we're gonna read it with these ideas in mind. This is a 4A's protocol. We're making a quick switch. What are the assumptions the author has? What do you agree with? What do you argue with? I don't know about you guys. Sometimes I read it home by myself and I'm like, what? What are you saying? Nobody else? Come on. Okay, I see at least one head nodding where you're like, oh my God. But feel free to do that with this text. And also, is there anything that inspires you? Anything that makes you say, that's the thing. I think I want to go in this direction. All right, we're going to take 6 minutes. We're going to read. We're going to come back and share our arguments and our assumptions. All right, beautiful people. I'm going to try something and hopefully not get myself in trouble. Okay. I want this to be our biggest share. I would like our shares as we close to focus on things we argue with or things we aspire to. If you have a quote or a part of the quote that you wanted to argue with and make a point about really, really, really quickly, I need you at this microphone. And I need you there in 15 seconds or less. If there's something you aspire to from this text, something that triggered something on the inside of you, you're like, oh, wow. Oh, yeah, I got to figure out how to get that way. We want to put you at this microphone, but we want to hear your voices. The whole reason for facilitating in this way was so that you could hear from each other. All of us are working on this, right? I don't know about you guys, but I was in my doctorate before I heard the word iterative for the first time, and then I was really angry. I was like, I feel like somebody should have used the word iterative, the idea that I could do a thing again and again and again, and it didn't make me dumb. It made me smart to do something as best I knew how, to get feedback and to come back and do it again, right? And to get feedback and come back and do it again until it got to be its possible best, right? That's where all of us are with equity, right? We're practicing as best we can, right? We're sharing with the people that we trust. We're getting their feedback. We're taking it in. We're doing the work, right? And then we're coming back to it like, okay, let's do new iteration, right? And so we want all the sharers that we can get. If there's something in this text that you aspire to or you want to act on, we want to hear from you. But if there's something you argue with, you're like, I don't agree with her. You can keep her. Well, she's missing something. You can grab a mic on that side. We only have 2 minutes for sharing. So need us to share quickly. Come. Come on, my good people. You got to get up because you got one more session anyway. Come. Oh, no. It's on, but it's off. Okay.
Yeah, so I'll just talk a little bit about this anyway. So I liked that idea a little bit of what you talked, that iterative process of reflection is something I aspire to. And kind of what it got me thinking is a couple months ago, I read a study about the self-driving modes in Tesla that were hitting people of color more often than white people. And it was this really strange data point. I'm like, how can your car be biased? And as it turns out, the technology was developed in Hollywood, which has a bias for whiteness. So the car wasn't recognizing the humanness of people of color. something's wrong with the lens, something's wrong with the technology. There's no culpability in it. The people who developed the technology developed it for an industry they were in. The car company took that technology because it was useful, but it's not working. So the data shows us that it's not working. So in this reflective iterative process, can we look at it to say we don't like the results? So let's come back and think without blame on how all of this happened, peel away that onion and just get to it. Let's just do the work, figure out why these cars are running over, people of color.
Please.
And the same thing with the children. What's happening? We don't agree with that. We don't accept it. So let's figure it out.
Thank you. It's the same technology in iPhones, for the record. Face recognition. Just saying. Other shares. We need all the shares. There's too many leaders in this room to not hear your voices before we go. 3 more before we go, please. And then we will close.
In Nora Clamarada, we were lucky enough that we got to work with Dr. Orange and one of her colleagues for a couple of years, and we've been practicing this cycle. And so what we've already started, we aspire to roll this out with our staff, but what we started with our home visitors, because they're in the families, working with families directly every week, and we're noticing that there's different results with different visitors. And we're wondering, is it maybe they're bringing their bias to the table that they haven't thought about? So we've started rolling this out with our home visitors.
Awesome, awesome. Orange and Van Isken, probably. They're amazing. 2 more. I might as well walk over here.
I know that for Child Development Center, we deal with social workers and things like that. So, unfortunately, 2 of the social workers that have come in, the county's actually doing equity because someone ran a report after that baby was killed in the home, Elian, the baby. And so anyway, they ran I'm gonna cry. They ran this report because someone said, "Oh, we detain African American students 8 out of 10 times. I mean, children, 8 out of 10 families are brought in, whereas all other ethnicities weren't brought in, and that's why that baby wasn't brought in." So the reason why they did a study for equity was because more African American babies were being taken away from families, whereas they were leaving the Latino babies with the families, and they were ending up dead. So because the babies were ending up dead or harmed, they said, "Oh, we need to fix this." Then they said, "But you don't have a problem with 9 out of 10 you're removing." So then now they do a monthly equity check to see, maybe we need to send somebody else out there. Maybe you're seeing the wrong things. Maybe you need to do a better check. So, like you said, it's for everybody and everything that we do, because there's a bias that you don't even realize exists in how you're impacting. They just took a baby, a nursing mother, because, "Oh, well, we thought that you did this," right? One of my babies, she had diabetes. You didn't know, she's 3. So because the doctor made a mistake, they filed neglect. So they tried to take her. So now they're going, "Well, did you really have to take her, or was it a mistake you made?"
The lenses affect us. Last one. Who gets the last word today? Okay, we're all school leaders. We all like the last word. Jackie's coming.
It just reminded me of the work that I am doing in partnership. We have this unconscious bias. All of us, if we have a brain and we live in society, we are biased. And there is something out there to help us. I shared this already in a workshop, to help us recognize our own biases, because we're the educators trying to teach these children, and we have to realize that success is different from all of our children. And I'm an early childhood special education specialist. And, where one time I had a kid who couldn't hold a pencil to save his life. Couldn't hold a pencil. So was he writing his name like the other kids? No. But I'm just glad that God gave it in my heart, put it in my heart to say, well, just let me get a boy a keyboard. I'm talking 3-4-year-old. Can spell better than me, got on any website he wanted to, gave him a keyboard. And I'm like, you're going to get me in trouble getting on this website. I mean, he wasn't getting on bad websites, but had I not, said to myself, I'm not going to keep any kid in a box. It's always another way. And so as educators, we have to realize there's another way for our children to do like even the same task. So this child, not only was he an echoleg, autism, echoleg, found out later he did have meaningful language, but I'm just saying, we as educators have to check for our own biases. So like I shared with one of the workshops that there's a Dr. Brian Marks. Have you heard? Okay. You know exactly what I'm talking about. He has, I don't know, I think the study is still going on. He has hundreds of tests, I know for sure, to where you can test for your own biases. And so it's the National Training Institute of Race and Equity. And we have our own biases. And he also did a word wall one time, those word walls?
I heard he does them in every training. Mm-hmm.
And it comes out the same way regardless of what audience he has. And that says something about all of us. So this equity training is a must. We have to help each other. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you. We will be bringing Dr. Marks back this year. We're actually in contract with him, so the Equity and Access Department will put something out. So if you guys want to see him, engage him, bring him to your school, he will be here. That is our last word. As you go, we're going to make sure that all of the resources are posted for you. Hopefully you can get to them, get through them. If you have to have this conversation with folks on your campus about why it's necessary, who it's necessary for, all of these different things, please know that the resources are available to you. They're designed for you to be able to use at will. My heart's desire is just we get better for babies, until we don't have to have equity conversations anymore. Thank you so much for your time, for your attention, and for your participation. It has been my pleasure to be with you, and I'm going to hand it back over to the leader of the house.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Noyes.